Since the start of the coronavirus crisis, my mind has been drawn repeatedly to an experience I had a few years ago. I was on the mayor's staff in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina and the failure of the levees that led to the flooding of the city. You know the devastation that followed, so I won't rehearse that. In my role, I traveled with and provided support to the mayor as he sought rebuilding money from the state and federal government. I also joined him on a number of international trips designed to recruit businesses to locate in the Crescent City. Well, one of those trips was to Shanghai, China, and we were to go from there directly to Sydney, Australia. This was the height of the swine flu epidemic. When we landed in Shanghai, a team of people dressed in full protective gear boarded and used their lasers to check the temperatures of everyone on the plane. Throughout the airport, unseen devices continued to check to see if anyone had an elevated temperature. Well, a few hours after our arrival, after we had attended only one business meeting, I was awakened from my sleep by pounding on the door. One of the mayor's security detail wanted me to know that the mayor and his wife had been taken from the hotel to be held in quarantine, and he needed me to do something. Apparently, someone sitting next to the mayor and his wife on the plane had come down with symptoms that suggested swine flu. They wanted to make sure that my boss didn't have it too. Now, let me say that no staffer wants the elected official with whom he or she is traveling to be taken into quarantine in another country. And to be clear, the concern is heightened based on the country where you are. So the round of calls to U.S. government officials and others began. Well, I got to know the 23rd Psalm very well during that time. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is our shepherd. I will not fear. Everything will be fine. Well, what follows is a long story, but the upshot is that the mayor remained in quarantine for several days. He came out only when governmental officials drove him directly onto the tarmac so that he could board a plane to Australia. They wanted him out of town. Now, whatever critiques anyone might have about the way the Chinese government handled that situation, what is clear is that they took it seriously. They wanted to prevent infections as much as possible. Well, today we're dealing with a different type of scourge, and we in the United States finally seem to be taking the coronavirus pandemic seriously. There is no doubt that the response has been hampered by the president's lackadaisical response until recently, and by the denial of many Americans who simply refuse to follow the CDC guidelines pertaining to social distancing. Now, St. Louis has joined a growing list of cities that have issued orders to residents that they are to stay home, that they are to shelter in place. Aside from taking care of essential needs such as going to the grocery store or pharmacy, the explanation is that we will all be in our homes. Of course, we are free to take a walk in the park or to be outside in our own yard, but the goal is to curb the rate of infection, which has come to be known as flattening the curve. No doubt some of the resistance to following the CDC guidelines was simple selfishness, with people feeling they should be able to do whatever they want to do. Some was the result of conflicting information about who is at risk. Some, perhaps, was that people needed to feel connected to others in a time such as this. And some, I believe, was fear. Fear that following the guidelines would make this horror too real. Fear that once we go down this path, we can never come back. Fear of what will happen because truly we know very little about this virus. Well, I believe that today's psalm offers us a way to respond to that fear. Psalm 23 is one of the most well-known passages in the Bible, and with good reason. The very first phrase tells us everything we need to know. The Lord is my shepherd, the first phrase begins. Now, this is not merely a statement that God watches over us like sheep. No. In the ancient Near East, the term shepherd was used as a royal metaphor. It connoted power. In saying, "The Lord is my shepherd," the psalmist is saying that God is the one who rules over life. That first phrase ends, "I shall not want." I will need nothing. I will have no lack. All that I need will be provided. This is the testimony of the people of Israel, who can point back to the ways that God has been their shepherd. Their God has led them from slavery, through the Exodus, and through exile. Despite all they had gone through, the nation has survived. Still, these absolutist phrases raise questions. I shall not want. How can this be true when we know that not everyone has what they need? Are only some people worthy of having what they need? Is this some type of early day prosperity theology? I don't think so. The psalmist yearns, according to the last line of the poem, to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Hebrew Bible scholar Jerome Creech tells us that this line qualifies the nature of abundant provision that the psalmist enjoys. Namely, the blessings of being shepherded by God are directly related to being in God's presence. So it isn't a guarantee that we will have all the material goods we need. That is subject to the whims of humankind and our economic and political systems. It isn't a guarantee that our relationships will always work out. What happens in the world is what happens in the world. But it is a reminder that in the midst of all that happens, God is with us. Through swine flu, through coronavirus, through lost jobs, through the deaths of relatives, through disappointments and uncertainty and loss and the unimaginable, God is with us. Now, that isn't a magic wand, and it doesn't mean everything is okay, but it is a point at which to begin, a point that offers us confidence and assurance. The psalmist had a testimony. Each of us has a testimony. And when this pandemic ends, because it certainly will end, we will have yet another. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God is with us. Thanks be to God. Amen.